The Gulf War of 1990-1991 left all sorts of loose ends. Chief among them was the fact that Saddam Hussein managed to survive in power. Even as guns were falling silent, President George H.W. Bush had an inkling of the complications that awaited. "It hasn't been a clean end," he wrote in his diary on February 28, 1991. "There is no battleship Missouri surrender." The observation would prove prescient. At the conclusion of World War II, Japanese officials had come aboard the USS Missouri to sign a formal instrument of surrender. Their signatures had ended the Pacific War. In contrast, the ceasefire that General Schwarzkopf negotiated with several Iraqi generals did not end the Iraq War. Instead, it opened a new phase in a war destined to continue for another 2 decades. Prior to the Gulf War, the United States had viewed the Islamic Republic of Iran as its principal adversary in the Persian Gulf. Now, Saddam's Iraq joined Washington's official enemies list. The Iranian and Iraqi governments viewed one another with considerable antipathy. Both now found themselves at odds with the United States. Through a combination of economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation, the United States had spent the previous decade trying to prevent the Iranian Revolution from spreading. Now Iraq came in for similar treatment. Similar, but not identical. Along with diplomatic and economic sanctions, the United States was intent on keeping Saddam militarily weak. The result was a policy known as dual containment. In practical terms, this translated into intrusive inspections that aimed to prevent Iraq from developing any weapons of mass destruction, and direct military pressure in the form of surveillance, threats, and periodic punishment. In April 1991, U.S. combat aircraft, initially Great Britain and France also participating, began patrolling what Washington called no-fly zones across northern and southern Iraq. The no-fly zones soon became no-drive zones as well, the idea being to deny the Iraqi army any access to these areas. Justified by the need to protect Iraqi Shiites and Kurds from Saddam's wrath, these patrols were soon launching punitive strikes to chip away at Iraqi military capabilities. With Americans back home barely taking notice, the Iraq War continued. Over the next dozen years, pilots enforcing the northern no-fly zone, as part of what the Pentagon called Operation Northern Watch, flew over 200,000 sorties. Only when the U.S. invaded Iraq in March 2003 did the mission end. In the meantime, according to Stars and Stripes, the U.S. military newspaper, pilots reported attacking hundreds, if not thousands, of Iraqi command and control centers, missile sites, and anti-aircraft positions. In the southern no-fly zone, the story was much the same. Here, too, the mission continued for over a decade, until Operation Iraqi Freedom commenced in March 2003. Aircraft committed to what the U.S. Air Force dubbed Operation Southern Watch flew well over 150,000 sorties and expended hundreds of precision munitions against Iraqi targets. What we have effectively done since 1992, one senior Air Force general bragged, is conduct an air occupation of a country. Occupation without maintaining a physical presence on the ground seemed to offer an easy way of asserting control over the regime in Baghdad. Only intermittently did the American public take note of the fact that hostilities against Iraq had never really ended. Now and again, like earthquakes that periodically rattled Southern California, a spike in military activity captured American attention, but only briefly. In June 1993, for example, 24 U.S. cruise missiles rained down on Baghdad, retaliation for a failed Iraqi plot to assassinate former President George H.W. Bush just months before. Bill Clinton, who had succeeded Bush in the White House, described the action as a, quote, firm and commensurate response. A bit more than a year later, amid signs that Iraqi forces might be contemplating another lunge at Kuwait, the Pentagon hastily deployed contingents of U.S. troops to defend that country. This time, no shots were fired. Then in August 1996, 44 U.S. cruise missiles struck targets in several Iraqi cities, retribution for an Iraqi assault on Iraqi Kurds in the city of Erbil. By this time, President Clinton's critics were deriding his penchant for pinprick military action that conveyed an absence of seriousness on the part of the United States. In December 1998, Operation Desert Fox reinforced that impression. To punish Iraq for refusing to cooperate with the United Nations weapons inspectors, U.S. air and naval forces unleashed a 4-day aerial barrage against Iraqi military installations and government facilities. Several dozen aircraft, supplemented by ship-launched cruise missiles, attacked nearly 100 targets, killing somewhere between 600 and 2,000 Iraqis. U.S. forces suffered no losses, while inflicting massive damage and considerable casualties. This was becoming something of a recurring pattern. U.S. military action administered punishment. The nemesis that had raised Washington's ire absorbed the punishment. But once the smoke cleared, not all that much had actually changed. Eruptions such as these typically generated a brief flurry of media attention. What they actually achieved, however, was less clear. Their overall effect was to normalize the use of force. Americans came to accept the presence and activities of U.S. troops in the greater Middle East as routine. Oh, did we bomb someone yesterday? But how'd the Sox do? That sort of thing. Washington justified all the attention given to Saddam by depicting him as a looming threat. So, for example, in testifying before Congress in 1998, Paul Wolfowitz, now out of government, described Saddam Hussein as a super mafia godfather and likened him to Joseph Stalin. Importing Stalin into the conversation might seem like a bit of a stretch, but not in American politics. When discussing foreign policy, Americans have a tendency to demonize and personalize. Doing so offers a way to simplify complex issues and deflect attention away from our own actions. During the late 1940s and early 1950s, Americans had done just that with the real Joseph Stalin. In the 1990s, Saddam Hussein as Stalin or as Hitler was reborn, and the arch-villain of the day served a similar purpose. Doing so was not without irony. In Iraq, to strengthen his hold on power, Saddam had erected a grotesque personality cult. His image was everywhere, in portraits, in statuary rendered on a heroic scale, and of course, on the Iraqi dinar. Saddam portrayed himself as larger than life, a towering figure in world history. Oddly, influential voices in Washington endorsed that view, attributing to Saddam vast significance. Get rid of Saddam, they believed, and good things would follow. Allow Saddam to remain in power, and there was no telling how much mayhem would come. Washington's obsession with Saddam became more acute with the passage of time through the 1990s. As it grew, the debate over U.S. actions, or in the eyes of some, American inaction, took on a moral hue. For those intent on depicting America's war for the greater Middle East as a moral drama, pitting good guys against bad guys, Saddam was a villain right out of central casting. Demonizing Saddam fed the belief that just as in Hollywood, eliminating the chief bad guy was going to ensure a happy ending. In fact, except to his own people, whatever threat Saddam posed was actually receding. He was no Stalin. He was more like Mussolini. Italy's Il Duce and the father leader of Iraq shared two things in common. The first was a susceptibility to megalomania. The second was an army that looked good on paper, but performed abysmally on the battlefield. The persistent hyping of the dangers supposedly posed by Saddam meant that there could be no backing away from Washington's policy of containment with guns blazing. If anything, influential voices suggested that the United States wasn't doing nearly enough to keep the pressure on Iraq. It needed to tighten the noose further.